You don't need a wheel to enjoy project motor racing, and you definitely don't need to spend hours changing controller settings every time you change cars. The objective here is simple: make the controller predictable and then stop thinking about it. This is the area around the center of the analog stick where the game ignores movement, and you want this number as low as possible. I'm using 0, but I'm on a new controller. I wouldn't recommend any number higher than 5 because it'll give you just a tiny buffer around the center without making the steering feel disconnected. If you have no drift, you want to try 0 or 1, and if the car wanders down the straight without you touching the stick, start increasing it slightly until that goes away. Don't jump straight to a 10 or 15, you're throwing away steering resolution. This controls how much stick movement is required before you reach maximum steering input, and I've settled around 70. That gives me enough steering authority for slower corners without making normal steering corrections excessively aggressive. If you're constantly running out of steering in the hairpins, lower the saturation slightly. And if you're getting too much steering too quickly, raise it. But don't use saturation to fix every handling problem. Sometimes understeer is just understeer. Now, this is one of the most important settings. At 100, you're essentially working with a linear response, and I prefer 85. That takes a little aggression out of the initial stick movement, and around center, I can make small corrections, and as I move further across the stick, I still have plenty of steering available. That's exactly what I want on a controller. Small movement for fast corners, more movement for slower corners, without the car darting across the track every time my thumb moves. Now, this one is easy to misunderstand. Project Motor Racing can regulate how much steering lock you're allowed according to things like speed and available grip. At 100, you're getting closer to the car's full available steering. Reducing it makes the steering a little more manageable. I'm using 80, and that's enough assistance to keep the controller predictable without completely neutering the steering. And if you go too low, the car may feel wonderfully stable right up until you discover that you can't get it rotated through a corner. Now for throttle, my throttle settings are dead zone 0, saturation 100, and sensitivity 100. I want the entire R2 trigger to work as the throttle. Nothing fancy, the first part of the trigger gives me a small throttle input, full trigger gives me full throttle. And that's particularly important when you're trying to feed power into a GT3 car while you're still unwinding the steering. If the rear starts moving under acceleration, my first reaction isn't, I need different controller settings. It's, maybe I need less throttle. The controller still requires throttle control, and that's a good thing. And for my brake settings, I use a dead zone of 2 to 5, saturation of 80, and sensitivity of 100. Important number here is the saturation. With saturation at 80, I don't need absolutely every millimeter of L2 travel to reach maximum braking. That's useful on a controller because consistently finding exactly 100% trigger travel isn't nearly as natural as standing on a brake pedal. I still want enough trigger range to trail brake, and that's why I wouldn't make this extremely low. We're trying to make the braking easier, not turn L2 into an on-off switch. For cars that actually have ABS and traction control, use them. These aren't embarrassing assists somebody added because you're on a controller. They're systems that the real cars actually use. With something like a modern GT3 car, I'll adjust traction control and ABS according to the car and track rather than trying to eliminate them just to prove a point. What I would avoid is turning on extra driving assist simply because you're using a DualSense controller. Start with the systems appropriate to the car you're driving, then see what you actually need. For actually racing, I would keep this simple too. My recommendation is roof camera. For a controller player on a single screen, roof camera is my first choice. And why? Because you can see further down the road. You can see both sides of the car better. And you get a much clearer sense of where the car is relative to the track. You don't lose half the screen to a virtual dashboard and a steering wheel. It's less immersive. I'm not trying to recreate sitting inside a GT3 car. I'm trying to drive the car on a controller. Hood camera, however, is a nice compromise. You'll still get a very clear view of the road, but you retain some visual reference to the car. It's slightly more immersive than roof camera without giving up much visibility. If roof camera feels too detached, use the hood. And of course, cockpit is the most immersive. It's also the view that usually gives you the least usable road information on a single screen. If immersion is the priority, absolutely use it. If consistency and visibility are your priority, I'd choose roof or hood. If the car still feels too twitchy, don't change 6 settings all at once. Start here. Steering sensitivity, we're going to drop it from 85 down to 80. Then test drive the car again. If it's still too aggressive, try steering pad lock scale from 80 to 75. Make one change at a time, drive the car, and see how it feels. And if the steering feels too slow, try steering sensitivity 85 to 90 or steering pad lock scale 80 to 85. Again, one setting at a time, test it, and then decide if that worked or not. And if you can't make slow corners, before changing the car setup, try steering saturation 70 to 65. That gives you maximum steering with slightly less stick travel. But be careful, the lower you go, the easier it becomes to throw too much steering at the front tires. A more steering input does not automatically equal more cornering. And if the rear keeps snapping on throttle, leave the steering settings alone and first look at your right trigger. If you're going from 30% throttle to 100% while you've still got steering lock in the car, that's probably your problem. The controller doesn't eliminate weight transfer in the car, it doesn't eliminate traction, and it doesn't eliminate physics. You still have to drive the car. You can absolutely spend hours adjusting controller settings. I've done it. But at some point, the settings need to disappear, and you shouldn't be thinking about steering pad lock scale while you're approaching a braking zone. The controller should simply do what you expect it to do, and that's what these settings are designed to accomplish. They're not trying to make Project Motor Racing feel like an arcade game, and they're not trying to make the controller pretend it's a steering wheel. They're simply giving your thumbs and triggers a predictable relationship with the car. Put these settings in, run some laps, make small adjustments if you need them, and then stop worrying about the controller and go race.